Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we are continuing with Unit 4 and we are talking about water treatment today. So as always, you should have downloaded your interactive notebook pages and these are the slides that go along with today's lesson. So before we get started, I want you to stop and think. When you're in the shower or taking a bath or you flush the toilet or you are doing dishes and you get done with the water and you let it go down the drain, where does it go? What happens to our water? I know the water that, you drain out of the bathtub or when you're doing dishes, it's dirty, right? You wouldn't want to drink the water the way it is. So where does it go and how does it get clean? That's what we're talking about today. So first things first, if we're talking about cleaning water, we need to first understand what kind of contaminants are in our water, and there's a wide variety to know about. So one type of contaminant is microbial. Micro means small, and these are going to be things that can cause disease, so like viruses and bacteria. These will generally come from livestock and wildlife, so a lot of times it comes from their fecal matter, which is just their poop. So those bacteria live in those substances and they'll get washed into the water and can contaminate it. Also, there can be inorganic contaminants like salts, metal, arsenic is a poison, also nitrates and nitrites, and these will generally come from mining, farming, and then runoff from cities as well. So when it rains, all of that pollution kind of gets washed into our water. Pesticides will come from farming, and a pesticide is just a chemical that is sprayed on crops to help prevent bugs from eating the crops, but it is harmful because it is a toxin, and if we were to ingest it, we would get sick. Also, there can be things like sewage, E. coli, and coliforms, and again, that's just going to come from like poop, right? So wastewater. And there can be radioactive contaminants as well, depending on where you live. And what kind of really elements are in the soil and the rock around your area. So here are how contaminants get into our water supply. This is just a little visual for you. So we've got waste from manufacturing plants. We've got runoff from those pesticides. Remember, these are chemicals. Gasoline leaks, animal waste and dead animals. Drugs being flushed into the water supply. Don't ever flush your drugs down the toilet. And when I say your drugs, I'm assuming that we do not partake of the illegal variety. I'm talking about things like antibiotics or any prescriptions, any over-the-counter medicine that you may be prescribed from your doctor. Don't flush that in the water because people do that a lot. People just like throw expired medicine in the toilet and flush it down the drain. And it can contaminate our water, and also sewage and waste runoff. So, when you use the toilet, that is a contaminant and it gets washed into the sewage system. Unless you live out in the country and you are not hooked up to the sewer, then it goes into something called a septic tank. So how much water do we actually use? So most of the usage is with toilets, showers, and washing machines. And we got to understand, where does this stuff go? So if we look here, the thing that uses up the most water, so if this is our total percentage of water used, is going to be our toilet. So the toilet does use the most, followed by our washing machine and then our shower. And this percentage of shower use can also vary depending on how long of a shower you take. I know that I like long showers, so I probably use a good bit of water. This is a picture of a wastewater and a sewage treatment plant. So I actually was able to tour one of these last summer. It was in July. It was super hot out. And it was kind of miserable because they do smell like these plants do smell like poop. Like it smells like waste, and it's really gross when you're there in the middle of the summer. It's not fun. But these right here, these vats, they have skimmers on the top, and they will take like oil and wastes out of the water, but we will talk about all the steps of that. It's actually, this would be an older picture because it's actually illegal to take pictures inside wastewater plants now. It is a security issue. So water coming into a treatment plant, again, this is a treatment plant, so this is where the sewer water ends up. So when you flush the toilet, or you have wastewater that's going down the drain, eventually it ends up at one of these treatment plants. So the water coming into the treatment plant can run from thousands to hundreds of thousands of gallons a day. So that's a lot. And these are just visual representations. Each of these would be, I can't remember how much these jugs hold. It might be 10 gallons. So the water that's coming in is cleaned in stages. So there are 4 stages of water treatment. There's preliminary, then there's primary, secondary, and the advanced stage, which is called tertiary. What you guys need to absolutely focus on and be able to differentiate is the primary, secondary, and then the tertiary stages. So here is a visual representation of those stages, and we will talk about these in depth as we move on. So our preliminary stage, the purpose of this stage is just to protect the water treatment plant. So in this stage, large solids in the water are removed. So there are these screens that are attached where the water flows through, and they just act as a filter. So anything that's like super large that might have gotten, flushed down, like, I don't know, like if you accidentally flushed, kids flush toys, or if you flush like a non-degradable wipe, or, you're flushing tampons down the toilet, which you're not supposed to do, those will get caught in the screen, and then it will not filter into the plant. So the screen will catch all of the big stuff. So the only contaminants that are able to pass through are really those smaller contaminants. So the solids, again, can include things like wood, cloth, paper, diapers, etc. You should not be flushing diapers down a toilet either. So after the screening process, we get into something called a grit chamber. And if you think about grit, it's just going to be like sediments. So the sewage will float on top while the grit settles to the bottom of the tank. So grit is very abrasive to the cleaning equipment, and it includes things like sand, cinder, which is like ash from a fire, small gravel, coffee grounds, eggshells, and other small objects that do not dissolve in water. So the grit will be removed in the grit chamber, and then the sewage will be able to move through and move along. So again, we have the sewage coming through, it gets to the screen, the large things are filtered out, and then in the grit chamber we have the settling of that grit. The grit will then be taken to the landfill, which we'll talk about later, and then the water will be able to move along. So then we get to our primary stage. And during this stage, the wastewater is temporarily held in a tank referred to as a settling tank. So if we think about settling, we think about, kind of, if we're settling, we're calming down. So this wastewater is kind of getting just settled down. So the heavier solids will be able to settle to the bottom, and then the lighter solids and scum will float on the surface and proceed to the next step in water treatment. And when we looked at that image of the wastewater treatment plant, those settling tanks were the big round ones that you could see that were in the bottom left-hand corner. Oops, I accidentally went back. So then our secondary stage, we use microorganisms such as bacteria to remove contaminants from the water. So these are going to be living bacteria, living organisms are going to be used in order to help us clean our water. So basically these bacteria really like to eat certain wastes that are in the water, so they'll eat them up and remove them. Now, it's very important to understand that the bacteria need oxygen to thrive. This is the same idea as when we talked about eutrophication, and the bacteria used up all the oxygen in the water to break down the algae. So here we're going to need to add oxygen into the tanks in order for them to do their job. So part of the secondary stage is going to take place in an aeration tank, and that's where oxygen is constantly put into the tank and the sewage. And then here's the little aeration tank, and you have these little pipes that will funnel oxygen into the tank and provide it for the bacteria who need it to do their job. So after the aeration tank, the water will move on and it will go to another settling tank where the remaining heavy solids will sink to the bottom. So here, any other solids that remain will again be able to settle and come out of the water. So there'll be a lot less in this tank because the first settling tank in the primary stage took care of a lot of it, but also the bacteria have been breaking down waste as well. So now we can move to our advanced stage. So this is also known as our tertiary stage. This is going to be the final treatment stage. So here, nitrogen and other inorganic compounds are removed. So remember, we had those list of inorganic compounds like the arsenic, the nitrates, the nitrites that we talked about in the beginning of the presentation. So this again is called the tertiary stage. This is the last part. So bacteria again will take the gaseous form of nitrogen and turn it into a solid, and the solid is something called alum. And then that alum, which is now in solid form, it's in big clumps, it will be able to float to the top, and then you can kind of skim it out the way that you could skim like leaves on top of a pool surface. So again, bacteria are playing a very vital part in the tertiary stage. So after that solidification is removed off the top, the water will then flow into a tank where an ultraviolet light, UV light, is used to disinfect the water. So they use UV light to provide a disinfecting agent for the water. UV is a natural disinfectant. It will kill microbes. We actually have UV lights here in the school that we use to disinfect our goggles for labs. But after the UV light is used, chlorine will then be put into the water to kill any remaining viruses or bacteria. Kind of the same way you chlorinate a pool before you get into it to kill any like fungi or algae. The same thing happens with water treatment. So then the water will travel down pipes and it'll be at a slow rate so the chlorine has time to kill the bacteria. So it's added and it's sent on its way, and then it goes very slowly so the chlorine can do its job. So right before the water is released from the plant, most of the chlorine is removed because high amounts of it is not good for you. So we don't want to have the chlorine sitting in the water, because once we use the water again, if there's a lot of chlorine in it, it can damage our skin, and if you drink it, it can make you sick. So finally, after the chlorine is removed, the water is released from the treatment facility and goes to your house. So the wastewater is cleaned, and then it becomes clean water that you get out of your pipes and you can drink. And here is just a visual of that wastewater treatment. And we do need to know the primary, secondary, and then the tertiary portions, right? So we have those screens. So here we have all of the big stuff caught. Then the wastewater moves to the grit chamber where the smaller things like eggshells and coffee grounds will settle out. And then it will be eventually pumped to those large settling tanks. And this doesn't have all of the steps, but once it gets to the settling tanks, the larger sediments will come out of it, and then it'll be pushed to the aeration tank where we have that oxygen for the bacteria. Oh, so the initial settling tank was right here. So the settling tank, most of the big solids are settled out. Then you push it forward to the aeration tank where we have the oxygen that's given to the bacteria, who will then eat a lot of the waste. Then it's pushed to the secondary clarifier, so another tank where any remaining solids can settle out. Then it will be disinfected via UV light and chlorine. Now, depending on which treatment plant you look at, they will either prefer to use more UV. Some places use only UV rather than using a lot of chlorine, because then they can cut down on the expense of having to remove the chlorine from the water. So that's just something to think about. So again, you do have to know the difference of what happens in the primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment. And I know we said there was that preliminary treatment, but the preliminary, which was just the screening and the grit settling, that is technically a part of the primary. So we do need to distinguish between part 1, part 2, and then part 3. So if you have any questions, let me know. And if not, I will catch you guys in the next one.